This week on the Sports Initiative podcast, I sit down with Leicestershire County Cricket coach Dave Whitmore. He discusses some of the traditional challenges coaching cricket in the UK, how they challenge scenario-based coaching when indoors, as well as developing leaders and captains on the pitch and trying to enhance their cricket IQ. As always, if you enjoy this podcast, please make sure you share it with friends and family. I hope you enjoy. Right, Dave, thank you very much for jumping on. I know that we've gone back and forth a little bit trying to get something in the diary and stuff, but yeah, really excited to have you on. Granted, not under amazing circumstances with the current performances of the England cricket team, but it's one of those things where I think we've been spoiled recently with how well we've done. But yeah, first of all, how are things? How are you?
Yeah, very good, thank you. We're just obviously sort of in our off season now, so just a quiet couple of weeks. Managed to get away for a week before we then get back into winter stuff starting from next week.
Awesome. So I think people probably would have gathered that it's cricket that we're talking about from my intro there. But do you want to, I guess, give us a bit of an overview of who you are, what you do, I guess, and a whistle-stop tour of how you got to that point?
Yeah, so I suppose starting from where I am at the minute, I'm currently at Leicestershire County Cricket Club, working on the pathway and academy. Predominantly, I'm head coach of the under-14s and 15s. But work a lot with the seam bowlers as well as then assisting all the other age groups and the professional staff when needed as well. How I got there, I suppose it depends how long we've got. Growing up, always interested in sport, very sort of sporty family, and growing up in Leicester, it's quite a sporty city and county. So there was plenty of options to get involved with, whether it be football, cricket, rugby. Never quite had the height for basketball, but yeah, loads of stuff that we just play all the time, and naturally, sort of cricket started to take over for me. Playing wise, I sort of got into the Leicestershire setup, and then at 18 wasn't good enough to really get any further. So I then went off to university in Leeds, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with the sort of cricket environment around universities. There's quite strong cricket programs in a lot of the universities. Just part of aiding player development, I suppose, giving players opportunities even if they have signed professional contracts. Excuse me, to go off and get an education. And so I sort of went off there, but with the view of potentially going into PE teaching. And then my coach up there at the time, he called me in for a chat and says, "Look, I'm leaving the program. I'm going down to Leicestershire to oversee the pathway down there." And I'd done a couple of my coaching badges, and he said, do you fancy getting involved? So I came back in the summer, got involved, and really enjoyed it. So much so that sort of parked the teaching priority, I would say, and sort of came out of university thinking I want to give coaching a real crack. Obviously, the issues, I suppose, as a young coach is sort of getting enough work to get yourself through. So I did a few other bits and bobs at the time, still going into schools and predominantly doing sport, but I went into a wide variety of schools, whether it be sort of primary schools, secondary schools, disability schools, and was able to build the coaching alongside this and gradually got more and more coaching work with Leicestershire, to a point where they says, look, we want to offer you a full-time job in the pathway. So I've been there now full-time probably about 7 or 8 years, 12 years in total. And sort of in that 7 or 8 years, I've done a variety of roles due to the sort of quick changing environment that cricket is at the minute. And also being at Leicestershire, the club that I am, we've probably not had great successes on the pitch, which has led to a lot of turnover of staff, which obviously has its difficulties. But for me, it's been really beneficial to experience a lot of different cultures and a lot of different coaches and work with a lot of different coaches in the same environment that I am in. So I've sort of got the benefits of going to a variety of different settings while staying in the same place, I would say.
No, I think that's a real nice journey that you've obviously taken us on there. But the first question for me off the back of that is obviously you mentioned around having loads of different people come in and ways of working and stuff. Is there any, I guess, one particular idea or way of working that challenged you or what you thought previously and you thought, actually, this is an amazing idea. Why haven't I been doing this previously?
Um, I wouldn't necessarily say there was one idea. I think there was one coach who came in, a guy called Alistair Maiden, who's now up at Yorkshire, and he really challenged me as a coach, which I thought was really beneficial to me in terms of I sort of had the mindset that I hadn't played professional cricket. I wanted to make sure I was really good at working with players in the pathway environment. But he really challenged me to try and look to push myself higher up and go into the professional ranks as well, and try and really work hard in that. So he changed a lot in me as a coach and challenged me a lot. In terms of specific ideas, it's nice in a way that you've got lots of different people had different ideas, but I think the core principles are still the same. And I think it's quite good to see a lot of the core principles, even in sort of your older style coaches and your more modern day thinking ones. The core stuff is pretty similar, and I think really focusing on that and making sure you've got the basic ideas right, and then you can add little bits onto it. I think a lot of coaches get carried away in trying to make sort of the 1% right, or focusing on the little 1%ers, whereas they haven't got the 10-20% elements in a good position. So I think making sure them bits are looking after themselves, and then you can add the little bits onto it as well.
Yeah, I think the environmental piece is an interesting one, and I guess something that fascinates me with cricket is it's so like coaches obviously have a role to play, but also you've got a captain, which is really paramount to the way the
Yes.
team works. And you look at Owen Morgan, what he did with the white ball team, and you look at Ben Stokes and the way he's captaining the test team now and stuff. And because they're on the field and having to make decisions and make tweaks and stuff, it's quite I'd say, unique blend of how staff have to integrate with players.
Yeah, I agree, and I think the current, certainly the test team environment at the minute. So with Stokes and McCullum, a lot of people just think it is aggressive batting and just going out there and just being ultra positive. But for me as a coach, I look at it and go, it's a phenomenal bit of work from the pair of them to create this environment, which you go on various courses and the psychological side of it. They talk about giving players the freedom to go out and express themselves, and they've created that in such a short space of time. And I think that is the most impressive part of it, because especially sort of with an Ashes summer and India being one of the main teams that played early on as well, there's a lot of pressure on those series, and to encourage players like Joe Root to go and do reverse scoops and shots like that. And it's stuff that, yes, they might get a bit of stick for if it goes wrong, but they've given the players full freedom to go out and do that, and say if it doesn't come off, then so be it, which I think is a real unique place to. There's not many teams, I think, certainly in cricket, who have got themselves into that position and that mindset of the way they want to play, whichever way it is, just fully committing and not worrying about the consequences of it.
Do you have any insight into how they've done that?
No, I've sort of picked a little bit at certain people I know, but I think it is just. I think they're very fortunate with the group of players that they've got, in terms of someone like a Joe Root, for example. How he's got a lot of credit in the bank of what he's done in previous performances. So if he does get out playing that reverse scoop, they're not going to be calling for him to be dropped just as a result of that. So I think they're fortunate with the players that they've got. But from what I gather, it's just a very relaxed atmosphere around the training environment, and they're fully backing players who are in situ at the minute in the team, and go, look, you are going to get an extended run and give it a good crack.
Yeah, and I think Zach Crawley's an interesting one of that, right? Like everyone's saying about him nicking off on outside off stump and whatnot, but they've kind of been really vehement of the fact, like, we're asking him to do this.
Yeah.
we're asking him to play this way, so we can't ask him to play that way and then get frustrated when he gets out playing it.
Yeah.
And so I think he's a really fascinating one. And like for me, I grew up in Hampshire. James Vince, I think, would have been a really nice example of this like 6 or 7 years ago. Because if there had been, I think that was the way James Vince got out, and everyone knew basically he's going to nick outside off at some point, but it just depends how many runs he gets before then. And I just think and wonder if he'd had someone like that was just really like, listen, it's cool, that's the way you're going to get out, but just stick with it, you'll get some runs. How maybe his career might have changed slightly in terms of the way that it's gone in international recognitions, etc.
Yeah, I think it would have been fascinating. I mean, that's a great example of it as well, the one that you just mentioned.
So in terms of like Leicestershire and stuff, you mentioned, I guess you've had some challenging times in terms of success on the pitch and whatnot. What, I guess, as a club, has that been put down to? Is it pathway stuff? Is it players leaving? Is it just turnover stuff? Is there anything that I guess generically people think, oh yeah, this is the reason why?
I might be a bit biased in my thinking here, but I think the pathway element has done reasonably well, and because of the turnover of players and turnover of staff we've had, the pathway players, the academy players, have actually had opportunities to get into the team. And what was really nice for us as staff over sort of the past 12 months, we've had Rehan Ahmed, who's gone on to be England's youngest ever Test player and done extremely well there, coming out of our academy. But also we won the One Day Cup in the summer, and sort of the players who played real important roles in that final were all players who had come through the pathway. So that was sort of really rewarding for us. But clubs like us are always going to have challenges financially, I think, in terms of we can spend time producing these players or bringing players in, but it's not like football where if they do well and go somewhere else, you then get money back in as a result of that. So you always have that challenge. And like I said, I think the turnover of staff has always been pretty difficult. Again, if we're doing well in certain areas, coaches get earmarked to go into different areas or different clubs or different environments. So that has been a challenge, but it was starting to get a bit of stability now, and I think that's starting to show in results both on and off the field with where we're at as a club. So I think it's all moving in the right direction. It's just fingers crossed we can keep it going that way.
Imagine geographically you're in a challenging situation as well, right? Like if you're a Somerset boy, for example, and you're playing down in Somerset and you live Taunton, if you get an offer from Nottinghamshire or Lancashire, you're thinking that is a long move to move my entire family all the way up and stuff. Whereas for you guys, you kind of are in a position potentially to get picked off at the north and at the south, so it kind of opens up the number of teams that are around kind of sniffing your players because they're in a radius where they might be able to make that shift.
Oh yeah, and it's not just cricket as well. Like we're in a place where you've got within the space of a very small radius of miles that you've got a Premier League football, well not Premier League football anymore, but hopefully next year Premier League rugby, a basketball team that's really successful. So we've had lads who have gone on and even represented sort of regional cricket under 15s and then drop out of our system at 16 to pursue a career in football or rugby. And thankfully, most of them have gone on to be professional in that area for at least a little bit. And there's a couple of lads now who are on the Tigers books. And that is also a challenge that we have, is losing players to other sports as well as other counties as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I guess from a football perspective, I'm quite fortunate we don't get too much of that. People normally kind of stick at it. I've worked at the Saints for over 10 years. I've only had one player that's kind of left to go and pick up another sport. So yeah, it's an interesting one. In terms of, I guess, that pathway, you mentioned that you've had quite a lot of success recently. So I guess two questions for me is, one, what values, what abilities, what core beliefs does your pathway have to try and help these players on their journey? And then the second one off the back of that is, with your high performing, high potential players, however you want to categorize it.
Mm-hmm.
What work do you guys do to kind of provide them with stretch to say, okay, we're going to give them opportunities, or we're going to try and put them out their comfort zone? Yeah, what work do you do in that space?
Yeah, so I suppose answering the first one, I think if I look at sort of the age groups that I work with, the 14s and the 15s. So the 14s we very much see as a developmental age group and a transitional age group, because it's where it starts to turn from boys cricket to men's cricket in certain aspects of the way it's played. So all of a sudden the bowling starts to pick up a little bit in terms of pace. You get challenged a bit more in the back foot. Batters can start hitting it out of the park once they start getting to 14, 15. So it's a very much a development age group in terms of managing players through that transition. Also, as they are 14-year-olds, there's a lot of other stuff going on with them, and physically, emotionally. So managing them through that, and exposing them to different situations. So, for example, we had a player this year who he'd probably go on to be an opening batsman, but he might not, when he first goes into professional second team cricket, first team cricket. Hopefully, if he gets there, get the opportunity to open the batting straight away, because there's already professional players in situ there. So he might have to go in and bat 5 or 6. So we do a lot of sort of exposure to different roles and environments for the players at that age group, so that hopefully when they go into the professional ranks, they've got at least a little bit of experience of different situations and can fall back on that, rather than just pick our best team to win games of cricket, which some counties do. That's their prerogative on how they want to do their pathway. But certainly at the 14s age group, we focus on putting players under pressure, exposure to different environments, and seeing how they go with that. But also, when we know we're putting them in an area of sort of uncomfortable situations, we've got to make sure we've got the comfort blanket of them afterwards to review it and hopefully make it a positive experience, rather than if they come back thinking, oh no, I definitely can't bat at number 5 or 6. We've had a sort of a negative impact on it. So we've got to make sure that we manage that well. 15s, we start to, like I said, transition into men's cricket and put a little bit more emphasis on performance, but there still is that element of rotating it around a little bit and exposure to different roles before we then gradually start to push it up to a bit more specific roles when they get to 17, 18, because players naturally find their way into them sort of roles anyway. What was the second part of the question, sorry? Challenging the better players, wasn't it?
Yeah, so the second part of the question was around what do you do for those high performing players to challenge them
so with my age group, one of the 15s, that's when they first get introduced to regional cricket. So that straight away is an area where, with the ECB, the better players will get challenged in the best v best over terms of the country. But we communicate a lot with the ECB on the players we want to put into that environment, and feedback on how they also get on in them environments too. We've pushed lads up at times to train with different age groups, especially when they get older, get introduced to being around the professional environment. And like I said, creating different situations in games where they are put out their comfort zone and put into different roles. Whether that might be, sometimes we have some real good players who are very big introverts. Right, actually, we'll make you captain for a couple of games and see how you go there. So you're developing their leadership skills as well. So there's no set way, I would say. I think it's dependent on the individual and where they are at. With their, yes, they may be better players, but if they're physically quite small, for example, sometimes going up might have a bit of a detrimental effect. So can we find more challenges for them at their own age group, or if they are physically a bit further advanced, we'll push them up and challenge their skill levels a little bit more.
And you have to excuse me because I can't remember the player's name, but you mentioned around the young man, I guess he is, who's gone on to play for England.
Yes, Rahan.
At an incredibly young age. What along his pathway prepared him to be able to make that jump at such an early age?
It's a difficult one, because I think with certain players like that who had the amount of talent and skill that he did have at that young age, I think he would always have found his way into a professional environment just on that alone, if that makes sense. So he'd have got his foot in the door. So it was more a case of us preparing him with support around him, again challenging him on certain aspects, and he'd almost have to have at times a little bit of a unique program because he'd find certain things quite easy. So how do we challenge him on that, or ensure that he's not getting bored doing them things really well? How do we ensure that he continues to perform at a high level consistently? And like I said, we had a good feeling he'd get into a professional environment, and then some of it would be on him, but we certainly didn't expect him to be where he is right now as early as he has been. But I think it's predominantly around the support around him, making sure he's got the right people. He's fortunate that he comes from a really good family who support him, his dad in particular. And he's got two brothers who are very talented cricketers as well. So it was a case of helping the family, and providing that support network in and around his cricket, as well as obviously the cricket development too as well.
Yeah, it always helps having siblings, right? I think
Oh, yeah.
everyone says about that one, which is an interesting piece. And I guess from a coaching perspective, and you've got someone who's incredibly capable, or has got high levels of skill or talent, or however you want to frame it. How does that challenge you as a coach? Because I'd imagine it's pretty easy just to send him out and go, yeah, just keep doing what you're doing, and like him having some success. But you also don't want to overcoach him where you ruin him. Because I say sometimes to those players that actually you need them to be able to kind of do what they do, and the moments of the interventions are probably more powerful than the quantity of them. So how did you manage that in terms of figuring out what he actually needs to allow him to make those steps, but also figuring out there's an element to this where I've just got to let him be and work through whatever he's going through?
Yeah, I think there's a variety of things that come into play. I think we're very fortunate with the team that we've got in terms of coaching. That there are people who have probably different personalities who you can call on it if for certain interventions, if that makes sense. So coming from one coach, it might have a bit more oomph than another coach in a certain area of whether it be his batting or his bowling or his character. It's utilising that as a team. I think that's really important. And I think getting to know him as an individual as well, working out how to challenge him in different aspects. Because sometimes he might go the other way and try and, if he's struggling with something, almost try and show off. And this isn't just Rohan. I think I've seen him with a few players who try and cover it by going the other extreme and try and almost show off a little bit, and then they've got something to fall back on that they've gone ultra positive. Whereas I think actually just trying to question his decision making, I think at times not necessarily go too technical with him, more I think around the decision making and the tactical stuff, and go, was that the right option? You're capable of that option, but are there any other options that you're capable of? And just making him aware of the options he's got, and then ultimately saying, just back yourself on which one you feel you want to go with.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong. It sounds like the patience side is quite an interesting one, I'd imagine, particularly when you're looking at the longer formats of the game.
Yeah,
like it is a game of cat and mouse, and it's like, okay, we've got to have a level of patience to stick to a plan of what we're trying to do. We know you've got these variations that you can use, but also there's a plan within the team to try and get this individual. We need you to stick to that. So how do you utilize that at the help the kids understand at younger age groups? Because I know that, listen, we all watch the T20s and the one dayers, and we watch the ball going miles away and going out the ground and stuff. Obviously, you ideally are trying to prepare them for all formats of the game and trying to get them exposure to that. So how do you get them to go from, right, this is a time to maybe try your variations and give that a go, to the other point where you go, listen, this is patience. We know that he's not playing outside off. We know that he's leaving it, but at some point he's going to play. And if you've been patient with our chances of getting a nick are far increased.
Yeah, so I think it's difficult, because I remember when I first started, and we do trials for the age groups of new players coming in, and so many of the batters would be scared of getting out, not play any shots. Whereas now we've just finished a batch of trials, and all the players who come in, all the batters just want to hit the ball and hit sixes. It's a complete mindset change for young players now. And I suppose we do a lot of it's difficult in the training environment, especially now where we spend probably just as much time indoors in the winter than we do outside in the summer playing games. So and you train in a completely different environment. You're in an indoor net on very hard surfaces, so it is a different game. But the challenges, I suppose, is doing a lot of tactical stuff, and you have to be a bit creative in the nets and training environments. And when you see players doing these variations, I suppose you just go, is the thinking right behind what they're trying to do? Is the field set for that kind of ball? Does it make sense for what they're trying to do and they've not executed it? Or is it a case of actually have they just got a bit bored and gone a bit rogue in their plans? So I think it's a balancing act, and it's again knowing your individuals. It's assessing the game that's going on in front of you, and then having conversations quite quickly after, I suppose, to just go, look, this was what happened. What was your rationale behind choosing to go with that variation or that decision? And if it makes sense, then you can go, right, I get it, and maybe there was lower risk options, or you could have just executed it a little bit better. So I think it's taking the context of the situation that you're in into a lot of focus as well, I would say. Don't know if I've answered that very well there.
No, you're all good. You're all good. One thing that I'd pull out from that, you mentioned around the understanding like the moment in the game or scenario in the game. How do you manage that as a coach? So like, do you have screens and stuff around the net, or is it more of a vocal thing of going, right, you know, we've got so and so bowling, he's a left armer, his field is currently, you know, 6'3", leg side heavy, looking at here and here, and are you like, do you talk them through it, or is there like a visual aspect to it as well?
Yeah, we don't have the facilities to sort of have the screens around. We have a few boards where we can draw imaginary fields, because obviously you got in the nets, you've got no real idea. You've got a rough idea, but you got no guarantee on where the ball's gone, how hard it's gone, certain aspects like that. So it does have to be very vocal, but a lot of it is you sort of, set up the situation and say, like, this is the context of the game. What are you thinking field wise? And then let them go off and do it, and then pull it back and go, right, this is what's happened. Has it been successful? Now you've had a bit more time to think. Do you think that there's other alternative options? And you've got to try and allow the players to think independently, because in the end, in the game, that's what they've got to do, and they've got to make a decision pretty quickly in terms of what they want to go with, and it hopefully allows you to work with the player to help them identify what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are. So if I'm working with a seam bowler and we're doing a bit of death bowling, right, okay, you set your field for a Yorker, but then you've missed your Yorker 3 times on the bounce, and it's a good player hitting them for 6. Right, what you feel is kind of irrelevant then. What's your other alternatives? And then they come and bowl a slower ball, which is they execute really well. Right, in that situation in a game, it might be better to build your game plan around your slower balls, and then use your Yorker a bit more as a surprise ball, or a bouncer as a surprise ball, rather than go Yorker, which is higher risk but also higher reward.
That seems like it seems like a disadvantage of England being like the only wet weather country, that you guys have to go to nets, whereas like obviously in Australia, India, I know they have monsoon season and stuff, but you know, a lot of the other, I joke all the time, I say that if I wanted to be a professional at something, it would be golf or cricket, because you get to go to sunny places and play in the sun. Whereas like outside England, you get to go to India, or, you know, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa. Is that not a really big disadvantage that we have in this country, the fact that you've got a large proportion of seasons in nets, which actually, I guess from an IQ perspective, you're not actually able to really play constructive games where there's repercussions or natural consequences to a bad shot? Whereas in Australia, they could go out and play, and they're getting real life action of what a reverse sweep looks like with certain fields and stuff.
Oh yeah, it is probably the biggest challenge, I would say, and something that I still don't think, as far as I'm aware, anyone's really cracked. I think you can be creative in certain training settings that you create. You can manipulate surfaces a little bit, but it still doesn't reflect um, outdoor conditions. And like I said, the consequence, we can add the consequence of if you're out, your net's done sort of thing. But they know they can still come back and do it tomorrow and come and have a net as well. Just to, I suppose to put that into context to finalise your point, we went to the UAE in February for a tour. And when we got out there, the place we were sort of based, there'd be games of cricket going from 10 o'clock in the morning to 2 o'clock in the morning. They just play all day, variety of different games. And talking to some of the other teams that were out there, the local teams, their players are playing 300 games a year, whereas our lads are playing max 40, 50. And that's if they're at a state school, then probably less than that because they get their fixtures with us, they'll get their club fixtures, but there is no real state school cricket available for them. Private schools get a lot, but certainly state school cricketers, they're lucky if they get 30, 40 games of cricket, whereas they probably play cricket 150, 200 days of the year. So it's a small percentage of the amount of cricket they play is actually in game environments because of the climate that we're in. And even this season, going back to under 15s, the first 4 games were all rained off. So you can have your fixture program in place, but if you have a wet start to the year, to the summer, sorry, like we did this year, then it does provide its challenges as well.
Next question: how have we produced so many good cricketers then? Because that for me that seems completely counterintuitive. By the way, the fact that you've got all these other countries that are able to play so many games that, like, theoretically, like you've mentioned there, if there's a kid in the UAE or wherever that needs to practice death ball bowling, they could go out and find, one game in the morning, one game in the afternoon, and do that for a month straight and get loads of opportunities at it. Whereas over here, we're getting stuff washed out, or the best option, if it isn't being washed out, is to go into the nets where obviously the parameters of where you're hitting or whatever looks very different. So how have we produced so many capable players?
It's a very good question. I think there's still, it's probably not as much now, but it's still a very technical game in terms of your skill elements. So you can practice a lot of close skills. I think a lot of coaches are going away from that a little bit more because they've seen players come from the subcontinent, especially who have just found ways of being successful with unique techniques, and they've realised that there's multiple ways to be successful. But I think you can still get a lot of the skill element done. Certainly with batting and bowling, you can do a lot of that in the net, but it's that game understanding, that game awareness, which is really, really difficult to do. And I think that's on the coaches and the challenges that they provide in their sessions to probably do it a little bit differently and rely on a bit of sort of decision making with an element of, yes, it might not be. We've sort of taken the outcome out of it a little bit in terms of, right, does that decision make sense to the ball that you've just bowled or the bowler has just bowled at you, and the outcome's a little bit out of it, but the skill of actually being able to hit the ball in that certain area, whether it be in the air or on the floor, you can do, and then just hope that the outcome, I suppose, looks after itself a little bit.
I mean, you'd need a multi-millionaire to do this, but I'd imagine, one, if you had a picture of a dome in, that would be ideal, over top. Or two, like the golf simulators that you've got that allow you to be on courses. It seems like you almost need one of those that's like 360 degrees, where you could stand with an iPad and move fielders into positions, and it kind of calculates ball speed that's come off the bat or something like that. But again, like, it's such a disadvantage having to spend multi-million pounds to be able to replicate what a game is. Whereas, like the UAE example, I watched stuff of Nasser Hussain where he goes out to India and Pakistan and he sees games, and it looks chaotic. There's games over games over games, but they're just the number of games that they're going to get and opportunities to face different techniques or different bowlers of different age groups is a fascinating challenge that you guys have with that.
Yeah, it's even a little thing like using bowling machines. So bowling machines that have their purpose, but personally, I'm not a big fan of them because you don't get any of the visual cues of a bowler. So a lot of the better players, because of the speed of the bowling, pick up roughly where the ball's going to go just before the ball's even been released by the visual cues of the bowler. But with a bowling machine, that's been taken completely out of the equation. So they do have their purpose, but if you want to practice your batting and develop that skill, you can't go away on your own and practice that, because you need physical bowlers to be able to bowl at you to then gather them cues. So it is a real big challenge, and I suppose highlights why our summer coaching is really, really important as well, in terms of lots of game-based sessions, and quite often, like, we had a few sessions over the summer where I'd go on and we'd do some inter-squad games, and I'd go on and actually captain the game just so that they could see a little bit of why things would be going on, so they get a good example, because that's also the challenge is, if they're not playing many games, they don't always get to see what good looks like. And I'm not supposed to blow my own trumpet with that, but I've got better understanding of the game tactically than some 14-year-olds. So actually they get to see what it looks like, and then can go on and hopefully replicate a few of them things. Because the issue as well is they watch a lot of games on telly, those who have Sky Sports, but they don't actually see the field positions a lot of the time, because the camera's just focused on the bat v ball element of the game.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like football, we try and do that, but it's the element of contact in it, which like it's quite nice for you. Obviously, you don't have necessarily that barrier. Whereas with us, it's kind of how do you give the kids an opportunity to understand what good looks like, or where they should be and why, whilst also not, having physical contact with a 12-year-old when you're playing. And I know at B team level now, or under 21s, quite a lot of them are getting players at the end of their careers who are coming in as kind of player coach dual roles. So at Southampton, a minute ago, a lad called Ollie Lancashire, who's come in. He was at Southampton's academy, went away, played a load of league games, has now come back, and that's quite commonplace. Where someone more towards the back in their career, looking for a transition piece out, they come in and train with the boys every day to get them to understand like standards of doing stuff, or why this is important, or prehab, set examples, rehab, all of that type of stuff, because you need to be able to do that. But doing that with a 14, 15-year-old is way harder for a coach. You want to be able to go in as a centre half and go, right, come on, you need to come round. But at the same time, you'd like to think that you'd win most aerial battles. Physically, you're going to be stronger than them at least. And so you have that thing. So I think that's a really interesting dynamic. The fact that you have capacity to do that is definitely, I guess, one positive.
Yeah.
So one thing, looping back probably about 25 minutes ago, you mentioned around profiles of players and like profiles of where they are in the team, or what their role is, for example. And this is something that I learned on the A license that I did. They use it quite a lot in England football for set pieces. So they'll say, are you a attacker, which is someone who I'm going to go and try and attack the ball? Are you a deliverer, whatever that may be? How forthcoming are you with, I guess, branding those roles, and how position specific are they? So if you look at, for example, if you're in a test team, if you're going Bazball, it might be that you're way more attacking than if you go the other way, when you had Jonathan Trott and Andrew Strauss or Alistair Cook, and your job is to soak up as many balls as you can and get as many runs at points, so that they're knackered, so that then when we bring the attacking players in, they can then got free reins. That, as an opening batsman, is two very different profile of player. So for you guys, how explicit are you with the profiles, and how much is it related to like your match model, game model of what you guys want to see from a game basis?
So I suppose in regards to our game model and that element of it, that's been one of the challenges, I suppose, of the turnover of staff, is that we've the person at the top changes and they have different ideas sometimes on how they want to play the game. So it's important for us, I think, to expose the players to different formats, allow them to sort of find their way a little bit, but we'd focus a little bit more, I suppose, on the processes rather than some of the outcomes. So that makes them a bit more adaptable to whatever the head coaches might want in the future. In regards to finding out about the players, so one of the challenges we have again with the finances and budgets, not just with us, I think in terms of most of the counties around the country, in that analysis is becoming very important at the top level, but it's still struggling to filter its way down to that sort of detail at the younger age groups and certainly in the pathway. So like we don't have an analyst in the pathway. We have one who goes up and does a bit with the second team, but doesn't really touch on stuff in the academy. And I think it's really important stuff for us, or really important things for us to try and gather so that we can have more information on these players. So I've tried to sort of come up with my own systems and had a bit of a blank canvas with it, but also no budget. So using a lot of free models that are out there or trial models, as well as leaning on a couple of other people to then go into greater detail of what we know about the players in terms of their performances in games and in training as well. So breaking it down rather than just seeing the scorecard which you get at the end of a game in terms of runs off how many balls, we try and work out actually how do they do against the ball spinning away, the ball spinning in. Do they have a high percentage of dot balls against different kinds of bowling? And then that kind of allows you to dictate where players fit into roles, because if you've got a player who's really strong at playing against spin, probably suits going into the middle order a little bit more, because they'll face a lot more spin in that phase of the game where they'll bat. Whereas if you've got a batter who, yes, he has a lot of dot balls, but bats a long period of time and is generally a bit better against seam in terms of his performance output, then you'd go they'd be more suited towards being an opening batter. So we can use that information to highlight strengths, but then also areas of development. So one of the bowlers that I've got, I'm going to do quite a bit of work with this winter, his stats throughout the summer when he bowled with the new ball were really, really good. But when he bowled a little bit later in the innings, his number of dot balls, the amount of runs, his economy rate went a lot higher, and the number of wickets he took dropped a lot. So a big focus for him is going to be, can we enhance his skills to bowl with an older ball where it's not necessarily swinging as much? Can he still find a way of being effective? And then when it comes to the summer, against the stronger teams, he'll probably still open the bowling so that he's being challenged in his better area of bowling, I would say, against better batters. Then when we play some of the teams who aren't as strong, actually he'll bowl more in the middle and give him a chance to develop them skills in game situations before then hopefully being able to push him to try them skills against the better teams as well.
No, it's a really interesting piece, and you said the analysis side of actually having those facts and figures and what they look like from, I guess, like a perspective of this is what we can see rather than just a narrative and stuff. Do you have like names for your roles? So would you have like a finisher that comes in at number 7 or number 5, 6, 7? Would you have a finisher, or is it just a case of actually we're just trying to provide them with a series of skills and we're going to move them up and down the order to allow them to develop those skills or utilize those skills? Or do you have like set boundaries of going, right, this player is a finisher, this player is a early attacker, this player is a maneuverer who's going to come in against spin bowling and do that? What does it look like in that space?
Probably not as specific as that, and that's probably an area where we could get a bit better, certainly myself, on that aspect, because I think it's probably a bit more relevant as you get up to the older age groups and trying to, if our director of cricket is saying we need this kind of player, right, well, we've got them to provide for you in the first team environment, and they've proven to be that finisher role in academy cricket. I suppose Yeah, we can do so. For example, if we play T20 games, we'll try I suppose all the spinners will get some form of bowling in the power play because that is where the game is going. And then you get a bit better idea of, right, they might be more suited to that period of the game. But it's if we just pigeonhole them into one area too young, I think we limit where they can potentially go with players, especially in a sport like cricket. If you look at like two of the modern greats really of batting, Steve Smith and Kevin Peterson, both came into professional cricket as spin bowlers initially, and then their batting skill has kicked on. And you see a lot of late developers. Stuart Broad was saying Broad came through the academy at Leicester predominantly as a batter, and then has gone on to be one of England's most successful seam bowlers. So you do get them late developers, and I think that's why we try and keep it as broad as we can. For obviously there'll be specific focuses because some players, like you said, will be more suited to defensive style of batting and some more suited to attacking style of batting, but give them different opportunities to just see where they end up going, I suppose.
No, it makes complete sense. As you said, the thing that fascinates me about cricket is that you can almost have players that just come out of nowhere. They hit a purple patch and almost go, "Oh, I belong here now,"
Yeah,
and just stick. Like Labuschagne is a really good example of that. Now I know he was at Glamorgan and he was doing relatively well, but no one would have thought when Steve Smith went out of that Ashes that Labuschagne coming in would have caused us as many problems as it did. Ultimately, he came in, did really well, and has ended up being a Test player and probably will be for the next number of how many years because was in a purple patch of form, has come across and done really well. And it seems like you get like Graham Swan came into the England setup a bit later down the line, and it is a really interesting thing in terms of more so than other sports. You just seem to find players that find an environment or role that works for them. They take off and then they're in. They've got a role and they're rolling with it.
Yeah, definitely, and certainly, I think you see it probably a little bit more in seam bowlers. Like our academy ends at 18, and then they have to go on and hopefully sign a contract with the professional staff. But there's lots of seam bowlers that I've seen over the years, whether it be in club cricket, university cricket, minor county cricket, who are reasonable bowlers, but then all of a sudden they get to sort of 21, 22, their body sort of settles into itself or they get a bit stronger and all of a sudden they've put on 10 mile an hour and they're all of a sudden an elite style bowler because of just that physical development of where their body has got into.
Last question to me is you mentioned around giving players exposure during power plays or whatever that may look like. With the younger ones, how scripted is it to what players are coming on where during bowling or batting or fielding placements, or how much is it up to the whim of the captain with a little bit of help of you guys? Because again, at the top level, it's like a game of chess, and they're moving players to try and get them somewhere else. You mentioned earlier around, sometimes the captains know what good look like, sometimes they don't. There's obviously going to be some output that you guys want from a technical delivery standpoint that you want players to experience, but then obviously you also want your captain to be able to react to what's happening in the game to then make decisions. So yeah, how much of it is scripted of you going, right, overs 1 to 10 is going to be these players, overs thing, and then there's going to be a period where you can do what you want? Or how much is it going, right, he's going to start there, but then it's down to the captain to figure out what next looks like?
So I suppose it goes twofold that we have a rough style of how we want to play our cricket. So players know if they're going into certain roles. So if they're going into batting the power play, they've got a rough idea of how we want them to play in terms of, right, that's a period of the game where there's only two men out on the boundary. It's a real area you can target that aspect. So actually, can you work on hitting gaps on the inner ring field? So even if they haven't got the power yet to hit the boundaries, can they still get it through the infield and get twos and threes? That's still promoting the style of play that we want without necessarily having the same results on that. In terms of scripting it, there'll be times where there's certain players, like I said with the bowler earlier, where we'll go, look, I don't want him to open the bowling, and I don't mind captain-wise who else opens the bowling. I'll let you choose that. And we also encourage a lot of the bowlers to sort of take responsibility for their own fields, so that it increases their cricket IQ, hopefully, and their tactical understanding. But ultimately, they're the ones who are deciding what ball they're going to bowl. So captain may set a field, but it might be for a completely different ball that the bowler is thinking of bowling. So we try and put a bit of emphasis on the bowler as well, to work with the captain around, this is the sort of field that we want. And at times we'll be sat on the sidelines tearing a hair out with some of the fields that the boys set. And they'll create new positions that no one's ever seen before. But it's just, I think you've got to let them crack on with it a bit. And it's also funny how many times they make you look stupid, and that you go, why on earth have they set this field? And then a catch goes to one of the fielders that you're saying shouldn't be in that position. It's just the way it is. And that's then the challenge, because you're going, that field has worked there, but 95% of the time it's not going to work. So actually, do we bring it back? So we're looking away with the cricket that we play at county cricket, is that we play 12-a-side. So a lot of the times, you can, bowler finishes bowling, you can bring him off and then have a quick sort of review of the field settings he's put in place, or even have the captain off for an over, just to go, look, what are you thinking, and sort of let them lead what the thinking is behind the decisions you're making, and then go, well, yeah, I can see it, what have you thought about this, or try and get them to come up with a solution still by themselves. So without, like you said, over coaching or being too directive with it, because otherwise they become reliant on you as well. So it is a balancing act, but I think it's trying to let the boys make mistakes, and then I mean, the best way for them to learn is if they set a terrible field and keep getting hit for runs, they'll learn that way that it's not the right field for them to set.
No, I really like that, and it's something, just listening to you talk there, it's like, how can you actually do that in football? What ways have we got to allow players to understand the game? Because we talk about game understanding and stuff, and repercussions of what other people's movements are, or whatnot. I think that's a really nice natural consequence where, as you mentioned, if they set a bit of a booky field, the natural consequence is you're going to get hit for some runs potentially. And ultimately, as we said at the start of this, captains are so important. How can we upskill them so they're prepared for what next looks like? And yeah, that's going to be one of my reflections of this podcast, is actually how can you utilize that type of dynamic to allow the players to understand, the whole group and their role in the group, and being a jigsaw piece and whatnot.
I think it's a little bit easier in cricket because the game is a bit more stop-start. I would say there are natural breaks in play. There's drinks breaks and periods there also in between overs where hopefully even if the captain and the bowler have not quite got something right in all the information we've given boys in our training sessions, there might be another player who goes, oh, have we just thought about this? Because there's a natural break in play when they're swapping ends, and that can sometimes lead to the desired outcome without you having to get involved. And that's ideally what you want, and that's where you develop. Again, if you're developing all these players, so captaincy, I'll rotate it around with a lot of my teams, because yes, they might have a 2 or 3 game period where they are captain, but actually it's important for various different people to have exposure to that for their personal development, but also their tactical development as well, I suppose.
Yeah, I'm thinking about, I guess the easy win is someone with the subs who can observe from the sideline, but there must be a way. That's going to be my go-to. There must be a way to do it more constructively, where people analyse, and then it'll help them analyse within the game as well. I'm conscious of time, so one last question for me, which is, if I were to speak to any of the players that you work with, or any of the staff members you work alongside, how would you hope they described you in 3 words, and why?
3 words. Can I have 4?
Yeah, I'll be used to it.
Hardworking, good guy, I think, would be the thing. I think hopefully a big part of my coaching philosophy would be building relationships with the players, and knowing that I've got their best interests at heart, and want them to develop as best as they can as players and as people. So I think that's a real big part of my philosophy and the way I sort of live life in general. Just try and be a good guy and work pretty hard at perfecting my craft as best as I can.
Nice. I think, yeah, really good one to have. I think it's good. It's good to be a good guy. Nice to be nice. So yeah, from that perspective, I think that makes complete sense. And listen, amazing conversation. Pretty much none of the stuff we discussed yesterday that might come out has come out of this, but a really good insight into what you do and some of the challenges that you face compared to football, compared to some other sports. So yeah, really appreciate your time, and we'll definitely stay in contact and maybe do another one of these further down the road.
No, thank you very much for having me, and hopefully it has been valuable, or at least I've offered some sort of value to the podcast.
Perfect. Appreciate your time, Dave. Catch you soon.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Sports Initiative podcast with me, Michael Wright. Please remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram at the Sports Initiative Podcast, and share this podcast with friends and family. I'll see you next week.